The QSS approach, based on our experience, we engage with clients wherever the client happens to be. So if you haven't got a lot of experience of RM3, we'll start very simple and build a layer of understanding in the organisation at a simple level, so that you understand the fundamentals of the management system. If you've been doing it for a while, we'll engage at a more detailed level and we'll take your existing understanding and we'll build on it. And we're looking for improvements in processes, benchmarking within your organisation. So we're aiming for excellence if you've been doing it for a while. But the RM3 approach QSS uses is to build up the structure a little bit at a time. And that's quite positive, because if it takes time out of your normal day to do RM3, it's useful if you can pick up the model where you left off. So if you need to do a bit of simple development, you can. If you've done that and you need to leave it for a while and come back, you can pick it up where you left off and build on it. So the model that we build with you in RM3 shows you a picture of where you are and allows you to pick up where you left off. It's very much easier to do it a piece at a time. You don't have to set time aside to do it. A lot of people treat RM3 as a once-a-year exercise, and they put significant resources on it. They sit a team of people down and they do RM3. Now, that's useful if you want to get objectives to feed into something like a safety plan and a strategy for going forward. But it's not very useful if you want to understand things that you can do on a day-to-day basis to improve your risk management. So we like to work with more people than just a small team. We like lots of people to have access to the information. And they can learn by using the model how to improve themselves. We don't have to point out improvements. People will see the improvements by looking for evidence and building on it, and then identifying improvements that they can make based on the criteria in the model. Okay, RM3 doesn't save you money instantly overnight. It's a long-term improvement tool. And people who use RM3, I think, and use it extensively, see the benefits of doing that. But they do put time and money aside each year to do an RM3 assessment. We'd like to save some of that money by having more people involved, but for shorter periods of time. So by providing a tool that you can build on, that you can return to time and time again, it means you don't have to set a significant amount of time and effort aside and take it out of your normal activities. People who get involved deeply in RM3 assessments on a once-a-year basis typically can't do their normal activities for a few weeks. They take the time aside and somebody else has to cover for them. That's a cost which usually isn't budgeted for. If you've got a tool that lots of people can use and where you can pick it up and do something in an hour or two that you've got free, you don't have to put a specific day aside or a week aside or whatever to do that, then we believe that you will save the overall costs. But it's very difficult to say how much you'll save because it depends upon what you're doing at the moment. If you are not using RM3 at all, I suppose a bigger question is, why should we go to the expense of using RM3 at all? And it's just really best practice in reducing risk. So if you think of the cost of a major incident or the cost of having a huge fine from the regulatory authorities, you don't need many of those to pay for a lot of effort to improve your own maturity. RM3-D, because it presents the information in a very clear way and builds layers of maturity in front of you, if you like, you can see where you are. It does speed it up because you don't waste time looking for evidence of higher maturity levels if it's not supported by the lower activities. So we always focus on getting the fundamentals, the foundations, the building blocks of the management system. We recognise what they are and we put those in place first. And quite often when we do an RM3-D exercise for the first time, we only spend time on the fundamentals, because we've learned that there's no point going to higher levels in some of the criteria if there are some fundamentals that are missing. A management system only works when the whole of the system is working together and information can flow round the plan, do, check, act cycle in a clear way. If you've got a gap in that, so maybe there's one part of your management system isn't working very well at all, you've got to identify that gap and close it first before you start working on everywhere else. Because if you don't, what you're doing is you're building actions and improvement on a false picture, on false information. So you want to make the information as accurate as possible, and that's done by having a fundamentally sound management system around all of the criteria in RM3. There are lots of organisations who deal in management systems. We have the ISO range of management systems, and there are lots of consultants who will help you improve in those areas. In fact, we ourselves do that as well. But we've seen where, for the long term, something like an ISO system, which builds up to a particular standard, when you reach that standard, it's very difficult to maintain the momentum going forwards. And I think one of the things that our RM3 support gives you is a lot more longevity, a lot more headroom for improvement. You don't just reach a base standard and say, thanks very much, let's relax, let's leave it there. It gives you an opportunity to go for more and more improvements and excellence. And I think the other thing with using the QSS approach is that over time, we do find that some of the fundamentals of a management system start to crumble and disappear, because perhaps you've had a reorganisation, key people with knowledge have left, systems have changed, and perhaps the new systems don't work quite as well as the old ones. By modelling the way in which your system is working and keeping a visual model in your mind at all times, over the years that you do it, you can see where some of your management system perhaps needs revisiting and rebuilding to support the overall process. And that's something that our approach will give you. Whereas other people supporting RM3, once they see that you've got evidence in a criterion, they'll just move on and look for other evidence. Our model reminds you there's fundamentals that need to be returned to. When we onboard clients, we have to understand where a client actually is. So typically we'll have one or more meetings with a client to see what they understand about RM3 and what they want to do with it, what are their objectives. Quite often there's an external driver. They may be required to submit an RM3 plan into a procurement exercise or similar. They may have a policy for introduction of RM3. And it may be that they've tried RM3 and really it hasn't worked very well. So there's already people who are a little bit sceptical about the advantages of it. So what we try and do is understand where a client is, what the client's understanding and what the client's knowledge is. And then we'll work with the client to get people who need to understand the fundamentals of RM3 trained and aware. So that's an initial part, is getting sufficient training and awareness that will make the exercise go successfully. So we always offer those training support where needed. We will then work with the client to identify those fundamentals of a management system and build a base model. And in feeding that back to the client, we are building the client's knowledge of what RM3 evidence actually looks like and how comfortable we are with the type of information that's available in the organisation to demonstrate that. One of the things that QSS does with any client is check to see that the base criteria in RM3 are well understood. And quite often we have to change the language of some of the criteria slightly. We don't alter it very much. We have to change it slightly to use the acronyms and the language within a particular organisation. And that makes it much more accessible. So rather than talking about things in generality, which is what the model has to do, we start to focus in on specific descriptions of the evidence that's available in that organisation. And that does two things. One, it makes it more accessible to people who understand the organisation and what goes on in the organisation. But it also means that when you reassess an organisation, or you do continual assessment, perhaps in subsequent months and years, you're returning to similar evidence. So you're comparing apples with apples in your assessment. And we are not too concerned about the level that you achieve in your assessment. What we do want you to understand is that reassessment, you're looking for improvement. So wherever you assess yourselves now, you need to be able to reassess yourselves objectively in the future against the same criteria, and to some extent using similar evidence, and that's what the model helps to do. The QSS team is qualified for this sort of work because we've worked in the industry for a long time, and we fundamentally understand what is required by a management system. And we also understand what risks there are if certain parts of management systems don't work very well. We get very strongly involved in incident investigation and follow-up. We review reports across the industry and from other industries, and we can see how management systems have to support the flow of information. And so not only do we assess you against the criteria, but we will help identify where shortfalls in that actually might cause you a significant problem in risk management and may be more likely to result in incidents and accidents. So I think that's quite important, that we bring our industry knowledge alongside the RM3 criteria themselves. If you want to learn what we've done for past clients, talk to us and we'll find an appropriate client for you to talk to, because clients have been at very different stages in their RM3 journey. And what we'd like to do is to point you to a client who's been through a similar situation that you've been through. And then they can tell you the strengths and weaknesses of our approach to using RM3. And we're very happy to engage with you on developing a specific approach for you. Every client gets a bespoke approach, that nobody gets exactly the same as somebody else has, because every client is different. The layering of organizations, the ownership model, the goals that are required, the splitting up of your organization into divisions, departments, depots, they can all be discussed when it comes to setting up RM3, because not only can you use it to assess your overall maturity, but you can use it as a driver for internal performance comparison and benchmarking. And it may well be that that will be one of the main advantages to using it in your organisation. So we need to set up an approach which exactly meets your requirements. The QSS Group operates a quality management system and is certificated to ISO 9001. So we have systems and processes, and we keep records of everything that we do. Part of that is GDPR requirements, and is also confidentiality requirements for clients' data. We also ourselves operate systems which may be vulnerable to cyber attacks, so we use the most up-to-date prevention tools for that. And when we work with a client, we'll only use those tools with you as well. So we're not storing stuff in a way which you would not expect from a confidentiality point of view. We use the Microsoft SharePoint range of tools, OneDrive and similar. They all have regular cloud backups, so the chances of losing data completely are very small. We can't say that they will never be subject to cyber attack. It's impossible to say that. But frankly, if the systems which record RM3 data are being subject to that sort of thing, you've probably, as an industry and as an organisation, got much bigger problems dealing with the same sort of attack. As far as storing the information is concerned, any client data is stored in a specific area, and access to that is only allowed in our organisation by people who are working on the project. We have non-disclosure agreements in place. We work with lots of confidential information when we're dealing with a project, and we are used to storing only that which is essential to demonstrate RM3 maturity. And if we have to get into confidential information beyond that, if perhaps there's a mixture of information, we will store redacted versions so that there is no possibility of that information falling into the wrong hands. We know that for most people, RM3 is a nice to have on their system. We want to get you engaged with an RM3 model that you can continue to use yourselves as far as possible with minimal licensing costs going forward. But the way in which that gets set up really depends upon how you want to deal with RM3. There is a setup cost for us getting hold of your base information and putting it into a model. The ongoing support costs will then vary depending upon how much external support you wish to retain. Some of it may be spent on training, so we may train and develop your people to use the model, and then the ongoing costs really just relate to licensing, and you perhaps want to retain some verification so that when you've entered your inputs into the model, you get a second party to come and check that things are valid. But you may want the ongoing support to be very intense and detailed from QSS for some time. Perhaps you're trying to bridge a gap in your own internal resources, and maybe there's a few months where you want the external support to deliver the outputs. But our aim in the long run is to get you to be able to do RM3 assessments using the tool that we're providing. We just want to work with you in the best possible way to get there. The ongoing involvement of QSS can be mostly remote. For long-term clients, we look to provide verification activities and maintenance of the model, which is not very intensive and can be done remotely. The model itself exists in the cloud, so you can access it from all sorts of different devices and different locations. You don't need a physical presence to do that. If you need more people training in RM3, although we can do training remotely, we'd recommend a little bit of face-to-face engagement, particularly if new people are joining RM3 in a group, and then they can be formed into a sort of team in a training room and can learn together. And that's often of great benefit in going forward. But the ongoing engagement of QSS can largely be done remotely. The model has been set up so that we don't have to incur the costs of travel and such like to maintain these things. Let's first talk about what results are. The results of QSS supporting your RM3 assessment is a risk management maturity model. So it is an assessment of your risk management maturity using the RM3 model. The actual results that you're looking for is well beyond that. You want to use the results of that assessment to change what you're doing and improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your risk control outputs. So the time it takes to get a return on your input depends upon how quickly you can engage with the results of the assessment and go forward. An assessment may be possible in a few weeks for a smaller company. It may take a month or two for a medium or a large size company. You then need to build the results of that into your improvement framework, and typically 3-6 months after that you will start to see the benefits. And that's the time when you can go back and do reassessments against certain criteria in RM3 to confirm that what you hoped would happen is happening, and you can further improve them. If you want to know more about RM3, go to our Contact Us page or phone us and we'll get back in touch with you very quickly. Set up an initial meeting, can be a remote meeting to start with, and we'll talk about your RM3 requirements.